I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
We're in Daniel chapter 6 this evening. We're down to verse 4, but what we need to remember is, all right, the Babylonian Empire has fallen. We are under the king of the Medes and the Persians now. We talked about Darius the Mede and the complications that archaeology has with him. There's no conflict with the Bible as far as that we understand. The Bible speaks about him in an historical nature, and just because our man-made archaeology can't find him in history, we can't find a lot of people in history. And lo and behold, when more work is done, perhaps we find people that we thought, well, that's just mythology. That's just these people just telling stories. And I don't personally know what's in it for certain people to tell stories as if they are histories. Because if they are histories, then even if only one source provides us the knowledge, we can trust that source if that source is proven trustworthy in other things. And Daniel has. When he talks about the fall of Babylon actually was that quick. It did happen overnight. So you can't go from chapter 5 to chapter 6 and say, well, Daniel got it right here, but we can't find it here. So therefore, here is an allegory. Here is just a myth. Whereas here, well, that's a little bit more historical. So we have Daniel. He's an elderly man here, probably well into his 80s. But he is placed as one of the three, the New King James would say presidents, leaders will say, under Darius in Babylon. Daniel was the first among all of them. And all of them had to give an account, and Daniel was preferred because of the excellent spirit that was in him, and the king set him over the whole realm. He's a Hebrew. He's not a Medo-Persian at all. He's not Babylonian. He's nothing like this. He's a Hebrew. And so this came and set the seeds for jealousy. It's not Daniel's fault. It's not Darius' fault either. It is these men alone who has that fault. Let's read verses 4 to 9. Let's do 2 verses each. Naomi, Henry, and then Bill and Tammy.
And the high officials and the star of tracts sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel, unless we find it in connection with the law of his God.
So these governors and satraps surrounded before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, now forever. All the governors of the kingdom, administrators, and satraps, the counselors, advisors, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree, and whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except the you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions.
Now, O king, establish a decree and sign the writing, so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree.
Okay, so as is often the case, and you have internal, we would call today office politics. What's the first thing these men tried to do in order to get Daniel gone?
They look for a flaw.
Something they saw as a fault. Something. All right, they were looking. All right, is he a thief? Let's see if he's a thief. We can catch him stealing something. We can go to Darius and say, this man steals. You can't have him in position of authority. What happens if he lies? Maybe he's lying, or maybe he's cheating, or maybe he's involved in some scandal with a woman or something, or something that they could go to Darius and say, this man's not trustworthy. This man, you can't have this man on top anymore. He's going to bring you down along with us. They couldn't find any of that. There was no error or fault found in him. Didn't mean Daniel was a sinless man, but he was a man of integrity. He was a man that they couldn't bring charges like that against, because he was a man who served God. And that really rubbed off on these men. They saw that. And so what was their determination that they had to do in order to get Daniel taken from his position of power? Couldn't find some sin in him.
Well, then they try to find something concerning him and the law of his God, it says.
Sure. They knew, they could care less about whether they kept the law of Daniel's God. Let's not confuse these men as saying, now we're going to go find if he breaks his God's law, and therefore we can go to Darius and say, he breaks his God's law. That's not what they're talking about here. They're talking about, okay, we need to know what he does in worship to his God, and now make that illegal. Because, what was that?
It's a setup.
Yeah, it's a setup. And so that's what they needed to do. They said, okay, what can we make? We know Daniel's going to serve God. They knew that he would only disobey Darius if Darius' law disobeyed God's as well. And so what was the scheme that they developed? What was the scheme that they developed?
We'll have a month where you can only worship the king.
Wow, that's quite a thing. That's almost like Nebuchadnezzar could come up with that. Like, as far as this is the position that kings often found themselves in. They wanted to be deified. They wanted to be worshipped as if they were God. The Babylonians had this. Tons of other nations. We can run into that today, where, like, as far as the leader of North Korea is often deified, and they worship him as if he's a god, even though they live in a godless nation. But, like, as far as that, we can run into that where people think that they are gods. And Darius was no different. Darius didn't come along and really argue with these men. Oh, no, you can't worship me. I'm not God. Darius went along with this. Shows his idolatrous nature when it comes to the Medes and the Persians. And so for a month, you could not request of God or man anything. Now, why would this be a problem to Daniel? Why would this be a problem to Daniel?
He prays to God.
He prays to God every day. And he did so not out of a sense of obligation, but out of a sense of, this is what's right. Daniel was not a law keeper. Well, I'm going to pray to God because my law says I have to pray to God, and if I don't pray to God, then whatever. No, Daniel was religious. He wanted to pray to God. He felt it necessary to pray to God for the things that he needed. Praying, God is real. God answers prayer. And Daniel was a believer in praising God. He's not going to praise man. He's not going to worship man. He's not going to do that at all. First commandment in the law was, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You will have no other gods before me. And so if we're going to come along and treat Darius like a god, Daniel's not going to do that. These men thought that they had Daniel. And they were correct in the sense that Daniel wouldn't do what Darius was going to set up. They knew it. That's why they did it. They didn't walk in front of Darius and say, in order for us to get Daniel out of his position, this is what we want you to do. No. They walked in and they flattered him. There are leaders who are prone to be flattered, and they'll do most anything if they are flattered. And Darius didn't see that these men were pulling the wool over his eyes and really had a hidden agenda as to why they wanted to do what they did. Bill?
It's interesting just listening to what you were describing Daniel's nature. In verse 10, where I never really noticed before, but it says that as soon as Daniel knew the document was signed, then we're told he went and prayed.
Yeah, which we'll get to in a few moments. Yeah, we haven't read verse 10 yet.
Oh, okay.
That's why we haven't discussed that yet. But we will get to that. Daniel's the kind of man who's not going to wait. He's not going to sit there going, wonder what I should do. Should I pray? Should I not pray? Daniel is not a dummy either. If you're going to have problems, you might as well get it over with. Because, as far as sometimes when we know we have a problem, we know we have something hard that's going to happen, we know we can't avoid it, why prolong the inevitable? Daniel's the character, he's going to go pray. But there is something unique about the law that the Medes and the Persians had. What's unique about it?
So that they throw them to the line.
No. I'm talking about the laws, the types of laws they passed. We haven't. I guess we didn't get. If you break the law, you're going to be thrown into the lion's den. It's sort of like the fiery furnace from Daniel 2 or Daniel 3. But what's unique about the laws of the Medes and the Persians? It's in verse 8. Can't be changed. Wow. That's a unique system of government. We would get into a lot of trouble today if one government passed laws that the next government couldn't change. That's why they only had a 30-day time limit on it. The laws of the Medes and the Persians, they had a system where you can't change the law. And if you can't change the law, if they had wanted to petition other people, they had other gods they wanted to worship, they came along with this 30-day limit because they knew Daniel wasn't going to wait 30 days. They probably could have had a 10-day limit or a week limit. And Daniel still would have been caught up in that. But they wanted to make sure that 30 days, and he certainly can't go 30 days without praying to God. And so Darius couldn't, once he signed the decree, it was set in stone. It couldn't change. We see this law at work in another book of the Bible. Let's go back to Esther chapter 3. Esther chapter 3, Esther takes place during the same time period, not the time of Daniel, but the time of the Medes and the Persians when they were the major empire. And Tammy, you want to get Esther 3, verses 6, 8, and 12 to 15. And Naomi, you want to get Esther 8, verses 3 to 5 and 7 to 12. Esther chapter 3, verses 6, 8, and 12 to 15.
But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. Verse 9, if it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasuries.
Verses 12 to 15.
Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus it was written, and sealed with the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all people that they should be ready for that day. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan, the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed.
This is quite the story here. This takes place in the first month of the year, the month of Nisan, and that's the Passover month that we read of in the New Testament. So the story takes place in the first month. What would happen, actually, they gave a year to give notice that on the 13th day of the 12th month of the next year, or of that year, I guess, but to us it would be the next year, that they were going to kill all the Jews. Haman couldn't lay his hand on Mordecai, who had the ear of the king. Couldn't do that. So we're just going to kill all Jews. That's quite the decree. And the king went along with it. Because in verse 8, it says, there are certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces, and their laws are diverse from all the people. Neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. In other words, Haman came along and did the same thing that these men here did. He trumped up some reason as to why this was reasonable to do. It wasn't flattery here, maybe like it was with Darius. But Haman's charge was completely false. And so they're going to set this up. 13th day of the 12th month. Everyone's going to kill the Jews that are among them. Now, the problem. Can't change the law. But Ahasuerus became wise to this plot of Haman, and now had a problem. Let's go to Esther 8 and read verses 3 to 5 and 7 to 12.
Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. When the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king. And she said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who were in all the provinces of the king. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring, for an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. The king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews. To the satraps and the governors and the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring. And he sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used for the king's service, right for the royal stud, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, kill, and to annihilate any armed forces of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods. On one day through all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar.
So, the first law couldn't be changed, so what did Ahasuerus do?
Made a second law.
Made a second law. What was his second law allowed the Jews to do?
Defend themselves.
Yeah. Now, we might think, well, that seems rather self-evident. Why would these people not have been allowed to defend themselves? They weren't the army. They were in subjugation. We take it for granted. Oh, we have weapons. Some people own guns. Some people have knives. Whatever they have, we'll defend our property. You weren't able to do that under the Medes and the Persians. You could be hanged for insurrection. You start going against the army, like as far as that's a death sentence. So Ahasuerus here, he issued a decree making it legal, and that law couldn't be changed either. And so, if you don't know, this is where the Feast of Purim comes from. It is on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month before Passover. You will find on most of your calendars, if they give you holidays, that you would see the Feast of Purim, usually in late February, early March, depending on when Passover is. Because that's when this would have been in our calendars. And so, it's a strange set of rules, and you would think that would cause the king to be pretty circumspect, pretty deliberate before signing laws. Because if they really couldn't be reversed, then you shouldn't be going making strange laws. But Darius and Daniel was flattered, didn't see anything wrong with it, and so he signed the law. Let's read verses 10 to 17, and we'll get who's next read? I think it's Henry. Henry, let's do 2 verses each again. Daniel 6, 10 to 17.
When Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then this man assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God.
Then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Do not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den. The king replied, the statement is true according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Then they answered and spoke before the king. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day.
And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians, that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed.
When the king commanded that Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions, the king declared to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you. And the stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lord, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel.
Okay. So as Bill said earlier, Daniel didn't wait. He prayed 3 times a day. These men knew it, and so they laid wait. It's amazing how Darius didn't come to ask these men that, how'd you know that? Daniel was praying in his own private room. It was in his chamber. What were you doing passing by his chamber? It's almost as if you had me sign this law in order to get him. And Darius knew what was up when these men came. He said that's why he says that the king heard these. He was displeased with himself. And as far as he knew, he'd been had, he'd been fooled, he'd been tricked because of what these men did. It's obvious. These men should not have known that Daniel had been praying to God unless they were looking. And Daniel was predictable. And so they go and report him. What does Darius do? until he has to throw him in the den. What does he do before that?
Well, he hopes that, like King Ahasuerus, he can come up with a way to make this not happen.
Yeah.
Tries to think of something.
Tries to think of something. This is a little bit more devious. You can't come along and say Daniel has the right to defend himself. Like as far as that's not the same. That's not the same sort of thing. He had trouble doing it. It was one of those things. You shall be thrown into the den of lions. It shall happen. Well, because even if Daniel had defeated the first set of men, these men would have come along. You just got to keep trying until you get them in the den. Like as far as and unlike with the Jews, within Esther, it was only a specific day that Haman selected. It wasn't a perpetual thing where it was going to go on until every Jew had been killed. Whereas this was, you do it, you get thrown into the den of lions. Doesn't matter when, doesn't matter how long it takes. Darius couldn't find a way. And these men reminded him, law applies to you too. Remember, Darius is, even though he is king, kings only rule when people will follow their laws. If the king makes a law and expects the people to obey it, and then doesn't obey it himself, the people are going to start deciding which laws they're going to obey and which laws they aren't. If the laws of the Medes and the Persians never changed, it means they never changed. How are you going to expect us to follow laws we don't like when you don't follow laws you don't like? And so Darius did what he thought he had to do. Throw Daniel into the lion's den. Now, he did say something to Daniel before he did that. What did he say?
Well, he knew that Daniel's God would deliver him.
Yeah. He was praying that God deliver him. Sometimes judges, before putting after giving a death sentence, sometimes they'll say, "May God have mercy on your soul," and that can be somewhat of an empty phrase sometimes. But Darius, I believe, actually meant this. He was sincerely hoping that Daniel's God, if Daniel's God could do anything, that he could deliver Daniel from the den of lions. But he closed the den, the mouth of the lion's den, sealed it with his own signet, and with the signet of his lords. In other words, if they sealed the tomb, they would know if someone had come along, if the seal was broken, they would know someone has come along and gotten Daniel out of the den, and that's why the tomb was sealed. Any comments before we read on? Why don't we continue with verses 18 to 24? We'll continue on. Henry, up to Bill, 2 verses each through verse 24.
Now the king went to his palace. The king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musician or God before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions.
When he had come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you constantly serve been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel spoke to the king, "O king, live forever."
My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they had not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Now the king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God.
verse 24.
And the king commanded that those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces.
Okay. So what did Darius suffer through that night after Daniel being cast into the lion's den?
Well, he knew he'd done wrong.
Yeah, he knew he'd done wrong. And how did he suffer for it?
He never rested.
He didn't have instruments of music to sort of soothe him, to calm him down. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. That's quite a night. Imagine what guilt does. Guilt sometimes will do that to us when we know we have done something really wrong. And we don't know what to do about it. All of a sudden, we lose our appetite and we can't sleep until something is done. So in the morning, he came to the lion's den, and basically he's trying to see, is Daniel alive? Is this God that Daniel serves, was he able to save him? I don't know whether Darius was surprised, but I know he was glad to hear the voice of Daniel. How come Daniel hadn't died?
But he sent an angel to shut the lion's mouth.
Yeah. He sent an angel. This shows you that God is in control of his creation. Normally, if you have some hungry lions, they're going to attack. And I'm sure these lions here were hungry lions. Throw a man down into the pit, he's going to be dead. Because it's not just one lion, it's many lions. But God can control his creation. Send an angel, shut the lions' mouths. By the way, this is how I believe the animals were able to be on the ark without killing each other. It's the exact same sort of thing. People come along, how can you have a lion and a zebra and a gazelle on the same ark? Won't the lion kill the gazelle? Well, if God let it. But God didn't. And so God shut the mouths of these lions, kept them so that their hunger was at bay. These lions didn't suffer through it. But Daniel survived. And so Darius pulled up Daniel out of the den. He found no hurt on him, not even a scratch. These animals not only didn't eat him, they didn't attack him either. And so what did the king command after that?
His accusers suffered his fate
His accusers, not only them though,
and their family.
and their families. It's the same thing that happened to Korah, if you recall back from the book of Numbers. Korah and the rebels who were involved in Korah's rebellion against Moses and Aaron, they were swallowed up in the earth by God. Those who, when they were told to retreat, who didn't retreat. These families didn't do anything wrong. Well, they suffered the consequences for the people who did. And that happens today, where there are families who suffer the wrongs if their husbands are in positions of power, and sometimes, as far as they did nothing about it. There is blame to go around. And I know the bell's gone, but we have 3 more verses to cover, and I'll read them before we finish. Then King Darius wrote unto all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever. And his kingdom, that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who have delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. This is how, by the way, I know Darius and Cyrus are not the same person. I was wondering why the wording was different, and it's because I have the other Bible open. Instead of the New King James, I have the King James Version open. But, so we have here Darius recognizing who the true God is. Just like Nebuchadnezzar. He just sends a decree to his people to fear Daniel's God. I don't know if Darius, same as what we said with Nebuchadnezzar, did he die in the Lord? He had faith here. But we don't know. But we know that what he did was right here. He recognized who God is. He told people to fear this God. And it appears that he followed this God, at least here now. It's unmistakable. You can't, the men who were thrown into the pit, they didn't even make it to the bottom of the pit and were dead. Whereas Daniel survived an entire night in the den of the lions. It's unmistakable. This God has to be the true God. And so that is the story of Daniel in the lion's den. The miraculous deliverance of Daniel by God. Only God could have done that.
I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to